All right, the first podcast done on a plane
30,000 feet.
over.
Lake Malawi.
Lake Malawi.
Wow. Okay. Well, listen, loads to talk about. This has been an incredible trip so far. I've learned a lot myself by the visit to Accra and here in Malawi. A lot to think about. But Alex, I think one of the things that stood out to most of us is when we got to Malawi is understanding this 44% currency devaluation. I mean, you put it more bluntly than I ever will. Do you want to just talk about that?
Sure. I mean, in short, currency devaluation is a crime, but we never think about it that way, and we never are presented with that information in a way that makes us realize what's actually going on. And when you go down to Malawi and you see people who are living in, maybe the sixth poorest country in the world, these are not people who need a 44% currency devaluation. They do not need a 44% reduction in their purchasing power. And if you were to actually create a weapon that were to harm the most people in a country, we could think about an atomic bomb or some sort of, biological weapon attack. None of them would be more devastating than a currency devaluation because none of them could hit every single person in that country and damage them. But that's what they've done. That's what the government and the IMF have done, and they're going to do more. The rumor is there's going to be another 25% currency devaluation soon. And again, we're just talking about people who can barely make ends meet, having the cost of whether it's corn or beans or chicken or anything they need go up. The exchange rate was about 1,200 per dollar, 1,200 kwacha per dollar. Now it's like 1,800, and it might go up into the 2,000s. So we're talking about people who already can barely get by, just making it so much harder on them. But no one's going to go to prison for this. No one's going to get in trouble for it. It'll be on page A12 of the FT, as a procedural matter. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. When you think about that, we visited those. They're making $1 a day. $1 a day.
33 cents an hour sometimes, 10 cents an hour.
And all their costs are going to go up 44%. And then probably another 25%. And it is such a crime against humanity. So to experience that, watch these beautiful. How could somebody ever get out of that situation that's trapped in a global currency order that imposes that theft on people all over the world? It's staggering.
Did they say why they were doing it?
Well, so the devaluation was not made very clear to the public, right? So imagine if it was a democratic process and they had a referendum and the government went to the people and said, hey, who wants a 44% reduction in their purchasing power next Wednesday? I mean, it'd be 0 people would raise their hands, obviously. So obviously devaluations can never be democratic. Malawi even is somewhat of a democracy. It's not like a dictatorship, but the economic part of it is the hidden repression, right? That this is the part that they always hide from you. The people were surprised with this. Some of them knew it was coming. They heard rumors, but the government made no official announcements until the day of. And what you have to understand is the level of income in this country, according to the UN, is $640 per year. Now that's the median. So that includes all the wealthy people who live in the capitals, the relatively wealthy people. So when we're out, in the countryside, people are probably making about $100 a year, maybe less, maybe 80. Maybe making, again, 10 cents an hour. So for them, I mean, this is just so crushing. And it's probably worth noting, like, the mechanism of how it actually works. Like, most people, first of all, they look at the word currency devaluation and they view it as this neutral procedural matter, right? But fewer people actually think about, well, how does the government actually do it? Do they just press a magic button? So in this case, what they will do in Malawi is the government will go to the banks and it'll say you need to change the exchange rate for the dollar right now. And that's one of the ways they impose it. They can also sell the kwacha into the market, or they can buy dollars on the market. So these are different tools they use to impose the devaluation. In either event, it takes effect quite immediately. And so it's interesting to see how do the commerce part of the country react? How do people react? So one of the big grocery stores, for example, it's a chain called Gain, run by the South Africans there. They shut down for the day because they had to reprice everything. So, maybe something was 10,000 kwacha. Okay, well now it's going to be 15,000 or something like that. So they're repricing everything. Everything's shutting down for the day. People are like reeling. They don't know what's going on. Jeff and I spoke to a young man the other day, and he was born in Zimbabwe. So he's seen the worst of the worst when it comes to hyperinflation. But they've never seen anything like this in Malawi, at least in the last 20, 30 years. You'd have to go back to the 80s. And really, it's just history rhymes. Like what was happening in the 80s where IMF imposed structural adjustments caused in part by a macroeconomic world where the Fed had raised interest rates really fast and really hurt all these poor economies. That's what's happening right now. The Fed has raised interest rates really fast. It's made things really hard for these other economies. Governments are really struggling. I'm not making an excuse for them, but I'm telling you why they're doing it. They're doing it because they have no money. They're totally bankrupt.
How does this give the government more money?
Well, because a lot of people work in the public sector, for example, and this means that the government has to pay them 44% less based on foreign exchange, right? We were joking with a friend of ours the other day, and we said, "Oh, but it's okay, right? The government's going to give you a 44% raise, right?" And they're like, "Ha ha, no! No one gets a 44% raise." So the point is, you're making all the things cost more, but no one's wages are going up, right?
It's a feature of the system.
But is there then a grey market for the Quattro where it's nearer its original value if it's an artificially set?
No. It's like Alex says, it's imposed on every citizen in the world because all prices go up, and if you're using the Quattro, then all prices relative to it go up.
So it's purely to cut their bill internally.
So I think a better way to look at this is here's some of the things we don't see on the knock-on effect. Our living standards in the West are a result of stealing people's money here, because otherwise we couldn't get the raw materials and from there at that labor rate into the West, and in the West our living standards are also based on a crime, but that crime and exposed higher, and here's why. Technology reduces prices. That means the natural state of a free market is deflationary. And every single thing, so think about how big that statement is. The natural state of a free market is deflationary. That means anything that stops it, all of the nonsense around teaching you economics and all the different words to be able to exploit a crime that stops the productivity from flowing to you in the form of lower prices, is all a big mirage to be able to hide this crime at a global scale. Because what it has to do is it has to extract the price that should be falling to you to other people. And it's a global crime.
And it's a dance between the IMF and the government, right? So what does the IMF want? The IMF wants cheap stuff for the West. That's one of the things that it does through its policies. It tries to get things as cheaply as possible.
Hold on, is that publicly known? Is that public stated?
It's never. No. Their public statement is they want to stabilize the world and end poverty or something like that.
Yeah.
Is a public statement that inflation is good? Most people would think it's good for you.
Is it a public statement that currency debasement or devaluation is a crime?
Is it a public statement that QE is nobody knows what this means?
It's gaslighting.
It's gaslighting. The whole thing is gaslighting.
All you have to do is look at the actual results, though, right? So what happens when you do this devaluation is that labor in that country becomes very cheap. And the goods that are made, obviously labor is a huge component of the cost of a good, right? Becomes very cheap. So countries around Malawi, countries far away from Malawi can start getting stuff from Malawi for way cheaper because their currency just got a whole lot stronger against the kwacha, right? So if you compare the dollar to the kwacha, think how much more Malawian stuff we can buy with our dollars. And what Jeff is saying is definitely true in terms of, one of the ways we've subsidized quality of life in our societies. Beyond all the great things we've done in terms of Western civilization, property rights, free speech, innovation, all that stuff, we have taken advantage of other countries to access very, very cheap labor, and that subsidizes our way of life. There's no way that Americans could have the way of life they had without countries like Malawi providing cheap stuff. It just would never happen.
And this is something I actually disagree with.
Okay.
And I disagree with, there is a way, but it would increase, the global wealth would increase faster and everyone would win because prices would fall.
Right.
And so it would look, we can't even imagine what that world would look like because we've lived in a world that's extracted from people.
Right. I'm just describing the world we've seen.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it could be different.
Yeah.
No, let's come back to that, because the interesting point on all of this is that we were told this story when we were there in Malawi. We were told the story of 80,000 slaves were marched through Malawi towards the coast to be exported wherever in the world.
On the coast of Mozambique, on the Indian Ocean, yes.
And you could probably explain that story better, but to me it seems like all we've done is we've now just left the slavery in the country and we've exported the goods at a lower price.
So we have modern day slavery.
Yeah, it's modern slavery.
We have modern day slavery disguised as economics.
Yeah.
That's what we have.
And to color in the detail, we were in a place where the building that we were staying in was actually built to try and stop the slave trade. It was built by people who were abolitionists who were trying to stop the Portuguese colonial export of slaves to Brazil, where at one point in the late 19th century, 80,000 slaves per year were being extracted from what is now Malawi and Mozambique to put on ships to take all the way around where South Africa is up to Brazil. Apparently only 2 of 10 actually survived and made it to Brazil. I mean, we can't even comprehend the monstrosity of what happened. But the point of what we're trying to say is the world has shifted the repression. So the repression used to be obvious and blatant. Now it's hidden, right? So again, a currency devaluation is probably the most devastating weapon you could target at a country, more than any sort of physical weapon, right? But it's hidden, it's unknown, it's invisible. Even people on the street, they're like, yeah, this really sucks, but they don't, it's not like they think that there's been this huge crime against them.
Often they even vote for more through making government bigger and trying desperately to get more money. They vote for more repression.
And to be clear, there were protests. So one of the folks we interviewed yesterday was telling us that in the 3 major cities, there were protests. The police came out, beat the crap out of people, and then they kind of died down, and that was it. I mean, this is, again, a country that's somewhat of a democracy, but it has a big problem with police brutality and corruption. And, police are not going to get in trouble for beating the crap out of somebody here. So they used force to put any sort of, questions down, and then they proceed. And again, they're going to do it again. I mean, imagine another 25% currency devaluation.
Tell the story about our hike with Juma and about them essentially exporting people to Israel to farm.
Yeah, I mean, the labor stuff is crazy. I mean, we had a guy take us on a hike the other day. Amazing guy. He's in his 30s. When he was younger, he used to climb this mountain, Mount Melange, with no shoes on, in the dark at 2 a.m. with a headlamp, to go to the top of this mountain to harvest wood and grass and bring it all the way down. And it would take you all day, and he was paid $10 for that. I mean, I would say Jeff and I are fairly athletic. This was a very hard hike. We didn't even make it to the top. And this guy's going as a teenager, in the dark, just with no shoes on.
Women do that too.
And today he's telling us women still go from this community. They climb a 10,000-foot peak, 3,000 something meters,
in bare feet.
Carry a huge thing of wood down. And this is like a really intimidating hike, and that's what these people are living through. So again, I mean, they are not the people that need this, and yet they're the people who get it. A 44% currency devaluation is never imposed on the people of Britain or the United States, that's never how it works. It's just totally unfair.
But he was really mad because the government made a deal with Israel to be able to pay his friends money to go to Israel to work the fields, because a bunch of the people from Thailand left when the war started. And then now Israel is facing food scarcity because of the farming. So they effectively exported these people.
Yeah, to connect it to the news, you might have seen that someone from Tanzania was killed in the Hamas attack on Israel. And a whole bunch of Thai nationals are hostages, right? So Israel imports, like a lot of Western countries, like the entire Middle East, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, they imported a lot of migrant labor. And the scam part of it, there's many scam parts of it, but one of the scam parts of it is these people are told they're going to make a certain amount of money. I think he said $12,000 a year, which is a
lot of money.
Huge amount of money for someone from Malawi. That's many, that's obviously like 10, 20, 30 times the...
Don't work 1 year, come back and... build business.
But what the thing is, the Israeli government pays. He was saying there's a big investigation into this, like a much larger amount than that. And the Malawian government they take most of the money for the labor, and a small portion is given to the actual workers.
So it's again exporting slavery.
Exactly. It's how Israel can get cheap labor to make its society cheaper. I mean, Israel has a big inflation problem right now. They have a big crisis going on because the war is very expensive. In most Western countries, when they face inflation crises, what do? They try to, find a way to reduce their costs. And one of those is, how do you reduce import costs? Well, you make cheaper imports by reducing the wages of people in Egypt or Malawi or wherever. I mean, there's been so many currency devaluations in the last 2 years.
You have to keep saying it. Inflation is wage deflation. It's the same thing. It's the other side of the coin. Every time you hear inflation, which is an unnatural act, the natural state of a free market is deflation. Economics is super simple. We want to trade with each other all over the world, and we want the productivity that's delivered to us to come into lower prices. We don't use things that cost us more. So it should be seriously obvious that we are all parts of that equation, trying to get more for less. Every single thing in economics is gaslighting to stop that.
Well, this is what Femi was saying to me. He's like, do you know what I hate most? He's like, I hate Red Nose Day. Because Red Nose Day is what gives you the perception that you're helping us. He said, you're seeing videos of poor Africans, you send a bit of money, and you send it over while you're raping our land.
Well, I mean, along those lines, something that's important to note on wages in these countries. Some sub-Saharan African countries reached a peak in real wages in the 70s that they still have not recovered from. I mean, think about how catastrophic that is. Given all the expectations we have around human progress, how technology is deflationary, all the medical improvements we've had, and yet still they're not making the equivalent in terms of rice or protein or petrol or whatever that they were in an 8-day work day that they did in the 70s in some of these countries. It's astonishing.
Is that peak wages in the 70s related to the high inflation that we had in the West during the 70s?
The high wages then were related to several things. So strong commodity markets, and look, it was post-colonialism. Some of these governments came out of colonialism and were quite robust for several decades. But then, the IMF started turning the screws. A lot of these socialist governments started running out of momentum and Soviet subsidy, things like that. Things started to deteriorate, and they started to rack up tons of debt. And an increasing percentage of their annual budget is now spent on interest and on paying debt back. For Malawi, it's massive. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but for Nigeria, for example, it's any given year, it's between 20 to 40% of the annual budget. It goes to paying interest on money that somebody else had loaned.
The IMF is a loan shark.
But again, that's the similar situation with Malawi, and that's why the government tries to do this stuff.
It's really hard to come to the conclusion that a lot of your lifestyle is based on a theft. Because we want to hide that, and then we want to say, let's donate to these aid organizations that can help it. Well, we carry on the theft. That's unfortunately what the world looks like. And why these currency devaluations have to keep on happening in this world. You just saw it in Egypt. You just saw it here. It's actually accelerating because it has to accelerate because to be able to keep the.
Well, Jeff, was there a better picture of this than the chart we saw last night? I would encourage listeners to check out the kwacha versus the dollar 20-year.
Oh, I saw it.
Do you remember what it looked like?
Like a shitcoin.
Yeah. It looked like an altcoin after a collapse. I mean, it's devastating. But you'll see in it, it's not just a smooth curve. There's huge step functions, and those are the devaluations.
So now zoom up for the people listening in Europe or US. It's still happening to you too. It's just it's what all you're talking about all over the globe is the rate of theft. That's all you're talking about. It's not. And so when we zoom into the micro problem and talk about all the economic reasons that it's happening there, that's based on the theft, that's on the rate of theft around the world, the whole system is based on theft.
Well, was it you saying, Danny, is that if prices were fair, we would see huge inflation in the West?
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, then our economy would collapse. We wouldn't drive electric cars because we couldn't dig the coal out of the ground for $2 a day. So all of these things, and you could say, okay, well then the technology wouldn't move as fast. It would move faster in a free market, but it would be global in nature, and all of the productivity would flow to all of us. We would work less and gain more every year. Right now, I would suspect that the natural rate of deflation in the market with technology moving is 5% per year, meaning globally, every single person would get 5% richer per year. And that would accelerate faster and faster over time as technology did more of the work.
Two things. One, what you'll notice historically is that sometimes our ability to exploit breaks down, and that results in massive inflation. So one of the reasons we had a huge economic crisis when the British Empire was at its peak in the 1920s was because the rate at which you could steal from India started to slow down.
Exactly.
Right? Of course, people talk about, well, was it because of the gold standard, or we didn't leave the gold standard? And there's certainly that's part of it. But another part of it is that the world's financial hub, the center of the world's financial hub, started to lose its subsidy from India. Fast forward a few more decades. In the 70s, we saw massive inflation in the United States. That was partly because of the end of colonialism and the fact that we stopped controlling energy. And all of a sudden, these other countries decided they were now controlling energy, and they jacked the price on us. Now, fast forward to today, you see globalization start to break down a little bit, right? And that's really something you can really notice, right? So now the question is, what happens if we take this weapon away from them?
Alex,
right?
before you do that,
Yeah.
just for context for everyone
Yeah.
listening, because you've written about this, can you just remind, like a brief explain of when the IMF was born and its original mandate? Because I believe it was originally set with good intentions.
Yeah, so in the 1930s, the world started to collapse in terms of free trade. Countries started to turn inwards and raise huge tariffs, and trade started to break down, and it resulted in a lot of negative consequences for a lot of countries. So after World War II, the leaders of the commercial world got together in Bretton Woods in New Hampshire at a hotel and said, how can we make sure that doesn't happen again? How do we make sure the spice keeps flowing, right? And they decided to create the IMF to do that. The IMF's original mandate was to stabilize countries so that they never had sort of an inability to import, so that you could keep the trade going. So the idea was if you were facing a crisis where you ran out of money, the IMF would come and give you a loan so that you could keep importing, keep the machine running, right? The problem in the 30s is the machine started to break. So they want the machine to keep running because they make a lot of money off the machine, right? The machine doesn't always help the people in the country. It can, but it doesn't always help them, but that's not their consideration. The goal of the IMF was to keep the global trade machine running. And, you could say that's an admirable goal. The problem is once the IMF and World Bank system helped repair Europe and Japan, which is what its original focus was in the 40s and 50s. In the 60s, it started to turn its sights to what we call, the global south, or what we would call today the developing world, which I think is an oxymoron because these countries are actually de-developing. But the reality is they started loading these countries up with debt, and you had an exponential rise in the external debt of poorer countries from early 70s to today, to the point where one of these countries might have had 100 million in external debt in the early 70s, and now it has 100 billion. So this system was never designed to be something that could be paid back. The only way these countries can keep going is to borrow more. And that's why Malawi today is borrowing more. Even though people know in the street that it's going to be bad, and that every time they borrow from the IMF, there's this structural adjustment, which hurts people. It's austerity. The government, has no choice in the current system. There's no incentive for it to do anything else.
Can I just
another bailout.
Can I just connect the dots to this, because it's super important? If you allowed deflation from this system, if you allowed the free market from this system, then all of the debt would collapse.
Yeah.
Globally.
Right.
And so why this trap gets worse and worse, this debt trap gets worse and worse, and we put up with the consequences, is you have to steal more at a greater rate all over the world because technology is moving faster the other way. And so at the same rate as the technology is moving, you have to offset it at a way faster rate, and you have to find more currency devaluations. You have to find more, you have to steal more money from people forever.
Do we know how much debt there is owed to the IMF now?
Here's what's more, forget the IMF, you have to go up a level, because otherwise you get locked in the inside, you're measuring the system from inside the system and little parts of the system. The overall debt in the world is about $400 trillion. If you've tried to pay back that at $1 a second, it would take 12,873,000 years to pay back. So it's already insolvent. We just pretend it's solvent.
Thank you.
But to give you just a context, like the United States has $33 trillion in debt, right? The U.S. Central Bank, the Fed, owns about 7.5 billion of that, or trillion of that. Between the IMF and the World Bank, there's outstanding loans, in around $1 trillion, in the low single-digit trillions. I mean, if you add everything up. And you have to remember, like, it's all about these smaller countries. I mean, this debt is so crushing. It's one thing for Germany or Japan or the United States to take on some debt because it can get refinanced at a good rate, et cetera, et cetera.
It can't.
They have. Malawi's worse is the point.
Exactly. It's just a rate, right? It's the rate of it can't get refinanced.
But there's arbitrage
There is
debt,
nobody
right?
to refinance the debt. It has to be debased in currency. You just have to keep on saying the debt is already insolvent.
Yeah.
It's impossible to pay back.
Exactly.
And anybody within the system is essentially saying, I am going to pay back the debt through a lifetime of losing value against my money.
Just a couple of other basic questions. The IMF, when it makes interest on the loans, does it just use that for more loans? Or is that an income that comes to the United States or
right, so
countries?
the IMF is controlled by its creditors. The largest creditors of the IMF are the United States, the UK, Germany, France, Japan.
Okay.
So they sort of control all of the voting power, and the World Bank as well. Again, the World Bank does development infrastructure, but it's the same thing in terms of the loans it's giving out.
Is this an income stream for these countries?
Absolutely. They make billions of dollars a year. But more importantly than that, again, as we've started this conversation, it gives them this tool, this ability to squeeze the wages of these countries and get things for cheaper. So that's the second reason they do it. And the third is a little more sinister even. It's sort of total control of country economies. So for example, when you have Malawi, where we just were, the kwacha is not accepted on international markets. For example, it's not like Malawi can use kwacha to buy a plane from Boeing if it needs it, or oil from Saudi Arabia, or grain from Nigeria. It has to get dollars or pounds or euros first, and then it can pay back its debt or buy something it needs. So what ends up happening is that the country has to engineer itself to produce what we want instead of what it needs. Because again, we're not going to just give Malawi dollars for nothing. We're going to want to see. We want ground nuts. Okay, fine, we'll take the ground nuts.
Add the other part. This is super important, but add the other part. And then all of the jobs to be able to, all the major high-paying jobs are consulting companies in the West to go in to teach them how to extract their minerals or or something.
It's like the Bangladesh story.
Exactly. I was going to say on Lake Malawi, it would be similar with aquaculture. So you have people who, for generations, been sovereign. I mean, they've been poor, but they've been free in terms of they herd cattle and they grow things that they eat, and they're not dependent on anybody. It's true they're poor, and I hope we can address that through all kinds of innovations and progress and technology and medicine. We can do that, but they're a different kind of poor today than they were 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Now they're poor and dependent. They can't grow the food they need to eat. They have to go buy it and rely on foreign markets. So the dependency is really the problem here, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Does that create a cyclical pressure therefore, because they're not growing the food that they need for the nation, then maybe got endless fields of tea,
Yes.
they're then having to import food.
Correct. Yes.
This is connected to every other problem. It's connected to it's all a circle that makes it worse and worse and worse. Or if you look at corporations today, when you look at the medical system, when you look at every single system, they're all centralized. They're all becoming more and more centralized. Realize in the free market there is no monopoly. A monopoly can't exist in the free market because it keeps competing. And when you look at the large monopolies and the monopoly of money, it makes perfect sense with why these things get bigger and bigger and exert more control over us. And then the outcomes, because it's not based on the free market, the outcomes to all of us, we're talking about in Malawi, but the outcomes to all of us have to be increasingly negative because you have to make trade-offs to stop that free market.
Is the dependence on the
Wait,
dollar...
just to give it facts for Peter. So Africa imports about 85% of its food. Think about that for a second. Imports about 85% of its food.
Is there a chart of how that's changed over time?
Yes, we can dig that up for you. Obviously, at one point it imported none of its food. It grew it all. So, and look, you can expect that to not be 100% because, of course, Africa's going to trade some things for we're going to have a global marketplace. But importing 85% of its food is crazy. Africa should be a net food exporter because of the breadbasket. I mean, you look at the soil you saw. Look at the amazing things you can grow there. I mean, look at the megafauna. The richness of Africa is impossible to comprehend. Not even just on food and agriculture, but also rare earths, resources, hydropower,
it should be one
all
of the
this
wealthiest
stuff.
nations.
It should be like one of the wealthiest nations, and that's why, the Black Panther comic series was created to kind of poke at this. Like, it should be a Wakanda, and it's not, and it's because of the global system of trade exploitation.
He also said, I asked somebody about this, about the exporting of, I think it was the pineapples you asked about to the UK, and they said, no, not really, because the UK will tend to buy from places that can produce all year round. Because here in the UK, whatever we want to buy it. We don't want to care about seasons or seasonality. We just want to buy what's available when we want it. And so a lot of that stuff tends to be grown in those kind of big industrial farming warehouses where seasonality isn't important. So just because they can't produce to the seasons we want in the West, we're saying we don't want your stuff.
Well, it's also regional. Like, it may not be. Malawi might not be selling to the UK right now. It might be selling to South Africa or something like that. But the system's sort of the same, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that I always think is, why don't they just go, fuck the IMF and default on the debt? But is that because of the reliance on dollars, they just can't do that?
Well, there's two reasons, and curious to hear what Jeff has to say, but one of the reasons is that these leaders tend to be unaccountable, right? You just heard about how they imposed a 44% currency devaluation with no sort of democratic process, right? So they're sitting there and they're running out of Forex. Like, Kwacha's worthless, but they need dollars, euros, gold, something. IMF SDRs, whatever. They need something that's like hard currency, and they're running out, so they're going to need a bailout. So they're going to be willing to sacrifice their people for the bailout. And they aren't going to pay the cost, right? They aren't going to pay the principal and interest on the loan. The taxpayers, the people will. That's sort of the tragedy. The second part of it is that at the end of the day, the creditors of the IMF are Western banks. It's the Western banking system. And if you're sitting there at Chase or whatever, and you're looking at a loan that is about to be defaulted on, right? You don't want that, because that will shrink your balance sheet, right? You would rather extend another loan to keep growing, your business. You don't want to see in the developing world a whole bunch of default on debt, because then your business starts to shrink. You want to just extend another loan. So all of the incentives here are for the system to keep growing and growing and growing until one day maybe it pops.
So it can't. So that's the thing. The system that you live in, if you're measuring it from that system, it will grow forever.
Yeah.
Infinitely.
And continually exploit
people forever. And that's where Bitcoin is repricing that system slowly over time, because it's imposing the free market everywhere in the world. But how do you get out of that system? Like, let's say, okay, now I default on my debt and I start anew, and then my country has to go through all of that again. Now I have to start trading again in the same system, right? So there is no fix from a system. So you could from one country you could do it for a little while. You might make it a little better for a little while after extraordinary pain to your society, but then you'd be recaptured by the same system.
So is there any work been done to have a look at the density of Bitcoin that El Salvador's built up. Because we know Bukele bought a bunch of Bitcoin at one point, and he talked about buying a Bitcoin a day. We know that that's now in the black, despite all the critics and all the mainstream media press that attacked him for this. But is essentially El Salvador repricing its debt?
Can we start? Yeah, can we start at a different place? So all over the world, if you measure in Bitcoin, prices are falling to the marginal cost of production. The only difference is so all over the world, if you're pricing in whatever fiat instrument, prices are rising. So essentially, Bitcoin is telling you the truth in what's happening in the world, and it doesn't matter if the debt gets destroyed or hyperinflated away. Bitcoin, just being an honest ledger, is imposing that discipline, and you can measure what should be happening in a free market. In other words, prices falling, the marginal cost of production is happening in Bitcoin. So now, Bukele entering into Bitcoin, his bonds are getting upgraded twice, while U.S. bonds are getting downgraded. That system is, and it starts really small in networks. So you have a global network effect. Anybody on Bitcoin, in other words, any person on the planet that knows right now could say, I'm going to move out of a system that is going to constantly steal my wages into a system that doesn't. And because it's an open monetary network, open decentralized system, anybody on the planet can do that. And what's happening is, as people are starting to see that, they're moving, and they're starting to cluster in regions. And as those clustering, and as there's trading within this on the circular economy on that, it's expanding. And it's expanding all over the world in different regions, some faster than others. And Bitcoin Beach, which was a small experiment, but then when this corner store gets on, another person, then all of a sudden other people want to see what's happening there, and more people go to El Salvador to see what's happening there. And then it moves into the president saying, wait, we can give economic freedom to our country and step out of this punishing system by adopting Bitcoin. Then the president sees it and adopts it. And then more people start to see it. Then other countries start to say, wait, what are we doing in this repressive system? We're going to do it. But the point is, and then BlackRock does it, but it doesn't matter who, every single individual on this planet, if they know, can front run the entire everyone else. And that system is for all of us instead of for a small few of us.
Just two things. On Bukele, it's important to point out that country was dollarized, right? So he didn't necessarily give up monetary policy authority to add Bitcoin. It was an easier decision for him. The Malawians, I mean, they're gonna send the kwacha to zero. They're gonna keep stealing and stealing and stealing, and they're gonna keep devaluing and devaluing. So you're probably gonna end up with a situation like Zimbabwe eventually, which is the sad part. In Malawi, the Bitcoin adoption and the Bitcoin stuff's going to have to come from the grassroots. I think what you see with Bukele is going to be a little rare for now. I mean, eventually, I think it's going to be more widespread.
But let's use this.
Yeah.
If you're an individual, so our climber who learned about Bitcoin with us, if you're an individual person in Malawi, and you can right now protect yourself from all that devaluation.
Huge.
So you don't have to wait till your country gets it. You don't have to, you can just move, and you can start moving right away. Then you can create your own circular economy with friends, and you can keep moving. So, and that's where it starts. So it's a bottom up.
And really critically, you have the grassroots adoption happening. And then if Bitcoin becomes a bigger part of the global economy, we take this weapon away from states, right? This currency devaluation weapon. Now, when an IMF imposes a structural adjustment, there's a bunch of things it does. And what Bitcoin will do over time is it'll take away the easy thing that they do, which is currency devaluation, because they can basically click a button and just steal a vast swath of like the entire nation's time and effort, okay? When we take that away from them, because they won't have that option anymore if we have sort of a Bitcoin standard, then they're going to have to look at the other options, which are raising taxes, very unpopular. People will definitely protest over that, and cutting subsidies for food and other goods. They're also going to riot over that. And if they try to impose those things, that will probably lead to their downfall. But a currency devaluation, again, it's this quiet, sinister, hidden way to repress people. So that's why, like, you have this dual thing here where The Bitcoin adoption is going to keep growing. People are going to be protecting themselves with Bitcoin, right? And at the same time, the government's going to get weaker and weaker.
Yeah.
That's sort of the beautiful thing that's going to end up happening here.
But the repricing in El Salvador, do we believe that this is now going to be over the next 1-2 years? Is this going to create a case study for other countries to go, hold on a second?
Well,
What's happened there?
Argentina.
Yeah.
Right? Argentina. He will probably dollarize first and go to Bitcoin. Right? And he'll probably use the same playbook and over time bring economic prosperity, and then more will move to Bitcoin over time.
And that could be a regional thing in South America.
And I think that's going to happen in lots of places in South America, and then it's going to happen in lots of places in Africa. And every time it happens, it's going to strengthen the system that is better for all of us. And so I always ask myself, what would it? Because if you just said the ledger that we live in today, by that, if inflation is a theft, and it's the same thing as wage deflation, and it's not natural in a market, then the ledger we live in is based on a theft. Our economic trade all over the world is based on a theft. What would the people that win the most out of that theft say about an economic ledger that isn't based on theft? That's a truthful ledger. And so you could see why the IMF is very critical of Bitcoin. You could see why all of the people that gain the most power, that controls the media today, control all of this, are most critical on Bitcoin. You could see it from the giant corporations that are going slow on Bitcoin. You can understand that because all of their wealth is created by, much of their wealth is created by that theft. And Bitcoin restores that, and it takes that back, and it gives it to everybody.
So what do you think happens in a country like El Salvador? As years go by, as their Bitcoin balance sheet grows to hundreds, maybe even billions. Do you think they use that to pay off their old debt, or do you think they just gradually don't need new debt?
So eventually they won't need new debt, but that'll take a long time.
Right.
But their economy will likely grow so fast because more and more people will move to a free market, and that free market will be more productive than manipulated markets. And then more people will move to free market, more innovation. It'll accelerate, and the debt in the other system is going to be inflated away. And Bitcoin's price will climb a lot by that other debt going inflated away, and they'll be able to pay it off for nothing, right? Over time. That's what Michael Saylor is doing in his own balance sheet, because he understands what the system looks like. And if you look at right now what Michael Saylor will be able to do to retire the debt that he already has to be able to acquire the Bitcoin, looks like a pretty good trade.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what'll happen. And again, the debt is being repriced all over the world by Bitcoin.
It's the same trade that a young woman makes in Malawi when they exchange their kwacha or time or labor for Bitcoin, right? That's the cool part, is it's happening everywhere. Something I would just say, look, there's a lot of things we don't know about El Salvador's Bitcoin holdings. We don't even really know where is the Bitcoin, who holds the keys. We don't even know if they're buying Bitcoin. Like last year, Bukele said he's buying a Bitcoin a day. Guess what? Bitcoin is a technology where he could actually show that to us. We have no idea. He's never verified any of this. And a lot of people in El Salvador are upset about this because, that public money, it's not his personal money, it's the taxpayer money, and they don't know where it's going. And he says it's going this way, we don't even know. But let's just assume that he has control over it and the state has control over it, and it's not gonna flee or be rugged or whatever. Then what ends up happening is, even though there's been a lot of problems in El Salvador with the rollout of Chivo, which was kind of a disaster, and some other things, and people today, or at least this summer, were kind of, I tried the Bitcoin, it didn't really work. There's a lot of that going on. The thing is, when the Bitcoin price goes up, everybody's like, oh, wait a second, we have this infrastructure. And even though someone like me is quite critical of Bukele and the government, what I can't deny is that this is going to be tremendously helpful for the people. That infrastructure, that idea has been laid, people have been educated about this thing. They may lose interest in it during a downturn or a bear market, but as the cycle keeps chipping away, 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, they're going to be in a great position. And I've always thought that. They're going to be in a pole position, honestly.
It's these densities of Bitcoin. So when I first went to El Zonte, It was a few people, Michael Peterson, a few kids that he employed to clean up and teach surfing, and he would pay them in Bitcoin, and then they would go to the local shop and buy their pupusas or get their hair cut. And it was just like this little tiny circular economy. But you have that seeded density of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened is like the last time I went to El Zonte, I'm sure you've been, but it's like everywhere now accepts Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And Bitcoiners are traveling there, and that's growing that density. But what's going to happen is I know the guy selling the coffee, he was accepting Bitcoin and he was seeing it dropping. But now as it comes back, he now sees the benefit. So that density of Bitcoin around, suddenly El Zonte as a region becomes richer.
When were you there?
First time was, I think, in 2019 after the Bitcoin.
So what I would say is to bring it back to Malawi for a second. And then you and I went in 2021, and by then it was like the wheels were moving. But 2019, when you went to Bitcoin Beach, or 2020 in that range, that's kind of what we're probably looking at in a country like Malawi right now. You had a small meetup, you had a handful of people using it. Most people in the country were totally clueless. That's what's happening in Malawi right now. So this month, there's going to be the first Bitcoin meetup in the capital, and you're going to start to grow, and it's not going to be stopped. There might be challenges, roadblocks. There's been so many scams here, so many cryptocurrency scams in Southern Africa, in this region, that people are sick and tired of Bitcoin because they think they can inflate it in their mind with MLMs and Ponzi's and all of these different coins. So it's going to take education and grassroots education. That's why the meetups and the physical spaces are so important. But you can't stop this thing.
But that's what's happening in Bedford. That's what's happening in Portugal, or sorry,
Philippines,
in Madeira. It's happening all over, and then these regions. Actually, HRF's doing a really good job of that. Is connecting these regions, and now you're saying, wait, this is working over there, and how's that working? And the technology is, other layers are coming in to connect it at a different level. So it's wild.
It's like a virus. Let's say what it is. It's like a virus. It's spreading, and it's building. But it's those densities of Bitcoin that I think are super important. Like I say, the net wealth, or the Bitcoin net wealth of El Zonte over the next year might 4, 5, 6x. And we know what we're going to see is new hotels. I know of apartment blocks being built there. And people are going to look at it and go, why can't we have that?
But do you think it will work as effectively in places like Malawi? I think it's great they're having a meetup, but in El Salvador, it was a little bit different because Michael Peterson had a big donation at the start, so he could actually start spreading Bitcoin. Whereas in Malawi, they don't have that.
But here's something that El Salvador didn't have, machacura. So this is very different. So in Africa, you have a lot of incredible innovations that people in the West are completely ignorant about. There's a young man named KG, brilliant. He's from South Africa. He came up with a way to use Bitcoin without the internet. And the first phase of this is an app called Machacura. There's a smartphone version, but then there's a version you use on a feature phone, meaning a phone with no sort of data capability. And you just use SMS, and you use it to access essentially a custodial Lightning wallet, like Wallet of Satoshi. But you can use it with no internet. So, among the young people in Malawi, according to some interviews we did yesterday, most people have one of the two things. They either have a smartphone with internet at the university level, let's say, or they have a feature phone. I mean, very few people in the 18 to 40 age bracket who are like in university or working, etc. in the country have neither. Very few have neither, and that means that everybody in Malawi who's really like potentially a Bitcoin user can access it straight away. And there's already an agreement that Machacura has with the telecom in Malawi. So we're ready to onboard people. It's just a matter of the education and the meetups, but I mean, this thing is going to be hard to stop.
But or add to the village we went to, right? For the first time, the village has electricity because of Bitcoin mining and gridless.
What was it you said to me? Imagine trying to stop this.
Imagine trying to stop this because we're up in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere, and we walk into this Bitcoin mine that's running on the river, so they can get essentially free energy. And the excess, they're powering the village. And so now, as those villagers start to understand the Bitcoin integration, this is spreading out. Not only you're giving economic hope, because now they can turn their lights on and all the time, medical, everything else. It's so staggering. Now, as those villagers understand the backbone to this thing is this thing that you just plug into this network that chases abundant energy, gives us more energy, and we make money from it. those villagers are going to start to wait, I want to get into on this game too. And so you're starting to, and as people understand this, they explode, the free market explodes. And what ends up happening is, let's say, you can't stop this because the free market won't let this stop because they're going to chase abundant energy everywhere
What was
for the money.
What was really cool last night when we were sat at dinner, I was sat next to the person who built out the hydro dam. And he was pointing out in the hills, it was dark everywhere, and you could see the lights of the village. And it's the only village in the area with lights on.
This is actually really important to know. In Malawi today, the grid, there's load shedding, meaning people in Malawi go 6 to 8 hours with no electricity every day. But the people connected to the microgrid at Bondo, where we visited, they don't have load shedding because the grid is properly managed.
Yeah.
That's what Bitcoin going to do. But the most powerful thing of all is that the people in Bondo, when they get paid, they're going to get paid in Bitcoin, not in fiat, right? So this is the kicker. And if you zoom out, you start to see how this can impact all of the tragedies that we were speaking about before in terms of the exploitation of the world economy. Today, again, Malawi cannot use Kwacha to buy stuff in the international market. It's got to do a deal with the U.S. to get dollars, etc. Well, what if, and again, economics is on the margin, right? What if in the future, the state is harvesting Bitcoin with its plentiful natural resources? I mean, in the future, in 5 to 10 years, Boeing is definitely going to accept Bitcoin for a plane, for sure. Yep. So this way, Malawi will be able to use its own resources without permission from the U.S. or some foreign empire half a world away. It won't have to do any deals. It won't have to re-engineer its economy. It can just harvest energy and turn that into the world reserve currency and buy whatever it wants. And that's the cool part.
Yeah, and we talk about in the future what the state will do. It doesn't matter because right now those people in Malawi that are mining Bitcoin and making money in Bitcoin, they can purchase internationally in Bitcoin right now. They are outside of the system of repression. They can purchase on Bitcoin internationally right now.
The only thing on my mind with that, and I think about this a lot, you're saying they're going to get paid in Bitcoins. Look, if you're living on $1 a day, being paid on a volatile currency, it does bring certain risk.
Certainly.
Can I just...
Yeah, I know you'll have a good answer.
It's just so... the question itself is so insane to me, and why I say that. I hear it all the time.
Thanks, mate.
I'm sorry, but I hear it all the time. Because all you're saying is one currency is losing value with volatility.
Yes.
And one currency is gaining value with volatility.
No, what I'm saying is, if somebody gets paid today for their week's work and it's $7, and they go the next day to buy their shopping, and they've got $5 because there's a drop in price.
So what just happened with the 44% currency?
No, I know that. See, what you're saying, they're used to this. They'll find a way.
This is the world they live in. In the U.S., this is happening right now.
Yeah.
It's the U.S. currency is downwardly volatile, right? You're losing money at it's not a prescribed rate. So
they're used to it.
And the opposite is Bitcoin.
Yeah, but Peter, here's that's sort of the background, but the actual technical way to overcome it during the next few years as we go through the adoption phase where Bitcoin's going to be very volatile is, for example, this. So we met this guy Grant yesterday, right? He's going to organize the Bitcoin meetup. He's got Bitcoin. Well, guess what? He can go to sideshift.ai and swap his Bitcoin for Tether if he wants. If he wants that dollars, he can have them. There's no other way for him to get dollars are not available. So stablecoins in the meantime, they can be like a nice little hedge for people, and hopefully we'll move away from the Tether model, which is centralized, and to something that's entirely Bitcoin native, which would be based on DLCs. There was the first ever mainnet stable channel broadcast onto the mainnet in the last 3 weeks.
And we'll
see. But this is basically like a long-short contract, and it exists outside of the financial system. It's entirely Bitcoin native. And maybe this can be a way to help people as we move through this time.
It's a transition time.
Yeah.
But if you think about what they're doing, so in Malawi they want the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. dollar is losing money less fast.
Yeah.
In other words, the rate of theft is less a rate of theft than this. And in some people, they don't want the U.S. dollar; they want houses. Right? They store their economic energy in houses because it's losing less fast than the dollar. And in some places, they think technology stocks, Amazon, Google, losing less fast than the house. So all of these conversations are within that system, and all of those are losing value against Bitcoin. because Bitcoin is repricing it all.
So long term, I think we're descending. So we'll have to wrap this up. So long term, as Bitcoin grows, continues to gain strength, more and more people adopt it. What's going to happen to all that dollar debt? Is it just going to?
It's going to be reset no matter what.
Yeah, it's just going to end up being gazillions, and who cares? It'll be valueless.
Valueless. Yeah.
Well, it becomes less valuable, and they have to raise the interest rates on it.
Yeah.
But again, if they raise the interest rates on it for any length of time, the debt collapses, and they have to print more money, no matter what. The debt's already insolvent.
Well, that's what happened. Yeah, exactly. So you're seeing that on the periphery right now. So like in Malawi, they can't really raise the interest rates any more than they are, very high.
Yeah.
And they can't sell bonds either, because no one wants Malawian bonds right now either, because of how high the interest rates are in the U.S. I'd much rather loan my money to the U.S. than Malawi, right? So they can no longer do this thing that they were doing during ZIRP policy, where the U.S. had like the lowest possible interest rate, so Malawi could offer like 4 or 5%, and people would come buy emerging market bonds. That party's over. So there's just very little they can do. So their debt is actually collapsing in value, and that's why they need a bailout. And eventually, eventually the rich countries are going to need a bailout too.
Do you think El Salvador? I know they've talked about volcano bonds, but do you believe they will establish a new type of bond based on the fact they hold a density of Bitcoin?
I think they're trying to drive a Bitcoin strategy. I think they know that Bitcoin strategy. I think it's a transition to a Bitcoin strategy, and that transition in each different wherever you are in the world, you have to think about it as a transition, because it's not. I think what scares people is they live in this world that they know is wrong, and they spend all their energy in it, and they actually make it stronger with all of their work inside that system. And they worry about this new system because they worry about it as a light switch. It's not going to look like a light switch. It's going to be a transition. It's going to be, but in one system, it's going to get more and more volatile and crazy, and more. And if you're measuring your world from the system that is based on debasement, it's going to get worse. And in one system, it's going to get better. But
I guess in the Bitcoin system, going to get more stable. And
But the volcano bond idea was great, and Malawi can do it. Any country can do it. I mean, what you're basically doing is you're showing that you have an energy resource with like a very predictable revenue coming in the future, and you're raising money off that. So all of these countries in Africa can do that too. It's not unique to El Salvador.
And that's the point. On that open network, it's not just the country. Any person can do it right now. Look at what you're doing in your business. Look at what you're doing. Your business. Look what I'm doing by investing on top of this. We have all made a choice to spend more of our energy in the new system that's growing, that's based on truth, based on a ledger. And as a result of that markup, our businesses are exploding. And it's getting more and more exciting. And we're seeing brilliant people all around the world moving over to this. And it's expanding at a rate. It's almost hard to explain how fast it's expanding and how positive that is for the world. And people who don't see that yet are still trapped.
Well, that was a conversation we were having. It's like, me and Danny were saying the other day is, if we think Bitcoin does what it does over the next 2 years, all I'm thinking about is like, oh wow, I've got all this new capital I can allocate into Bedford and do this project or that project. So that's where,
And again, all that took is you creating a Bitcoin podcast to be able to start. It's an open monetary network, and it took a lot more than that. But
just interviewing people on planes.
Yeah. Again, but also, 25% of our income we got paid in Bitcoin, and we've left it in Bitcoin.
Yeah, Natalie Brunel. I remember her 2020 Bitcoin conference where she had to sneak in with a press pass, not sneak in, but get a press pass, and she couldn't get into a bunch of the events because she wasn't well known enough. And she said, out of that, she learned a bunch, and she said, I'm just going and I'm dropping out of kind of the media world, and I'm going to do what I do all in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Look at what happened. And when you have a network like this that is open to anybody just to make a decision and move, that has the amount of, I'm watching it with people I love have more of a voice, more opportunity, and they're having more of an opportunity because they're helping people, right? It's in service of other people, and the more and more people that are doing that is grabbing more people that helps other people, and that's every single business is based on delivering more value to other people. This is an open network that doesn't, you don't have to wait. You just start.
Well, listen, I think we've
Just
got to
quickly
stop, don't
before
we?
we wrap, we really do because we're going to land soon. But I want to ask Alex a question because last night at dinner there was a talk and there was something that was utterly insane to me. He said that the Malawian government are going to start investing in electric car power points across the country. And of every problem we saw in Malawi, that petrol cars was definitely not up there.
Most people were walking or on bikes.
They don't. I mean, electric. I mean, they don't even have a grid that works.
Exactly. So is that part of the IMF structural adjustment, trying to ascribe like Western values on this country?
I mean, there are often like encouragements on that. That's called green colonialism, actually.
Yeah.
I've got a chapter in hidden repression on that. Sometimes it will be actually written into the loan that it has to be green or whatever. Oftentimes, other times there's like a subsidy for it. Like if you do this, we'll do this.
Right.
But the funniest thing is that the Bitcoin community can take advantage of that in a way. One of the guys that we were with the other day, his plan is going to be, they're going to set up all these EV charging stations. There's not nobody's going to be plugging in EVs or Teslas in Malawi. So it's going to be sitting there with a like solar panel on the side of the road doing nothing.
Yeah.
So he's going to come by with some Bitcoin miners. And he's going to mine Bitcoin. And he's going to pay a little kickback to the guy who runs the gas station or whatever, so he doesn't get thrown out. And he's going to make a lot of Bitcoin off this. And at least somebody will benefit. And that's pretty cool.
I mean, even a Cybertruck couldn't do some of those roads.
All right, listen, look, amazing place to record a pod.
Yeah.
I think we could have gone for ages more, which is a shame of the limitation of the flight, but thank you. One thing I'm going to do is, I read The Price of Tomorrow I think it was about 3 years ago, I think I may have read it. I haven't read it since, but I think I've got a lot more context to go back and reread it.
Time for a reread.
Yeah, time for a reread. So thanks, guys. Appreciate this.
Awesome.
Interesting place.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
let's wrap up.
Peace.
Thanks, guys.